Hey everybody, Danny Roddy of DannyRoddy.com. Thank you so much for clicking on this video. Thank you for liking, subscribing, commenting, etc. I sincerely appreciate it. Thank you so much. I have an amazing listenership, so I'm very lucky. So thank you guys. I wanted to talk today a little bit about my hypothesis for the new book I'm working on. And so a few people asked about it in the last video. And so it's taking me so long because I've really come to think that the brain is involved in so-called androgenic alopecia or male pattern baldness. And I don't know anything about the brain. And so it's taken me a while to kind of put these pieces together. And it will take me a little bit longer to write confidently about it. And I really shouldn't be writing about it if I have no idea what I'm talking about. So just before we get into this video, which will just be a short cliff notes, hopefully, if I don't go too long, I have an older book in 2013. And I consider all this content to be an extension of that older 2013 book. I have like an Instagram you can go peruse through, and I talk to people online through Patreon. And then there's a Twitter and all the content on here. So that's all another way of saying that the content doesn't end here, and there are many other sources and resources for a person to read up on this style of content if they're interested. So the big question I think that the book will try to answer, I feel like, is what is the function of hair? And the current idea being that the brain is the most metabolically intense organ, and small deprivations in temperature or changes in temperature can have a detrimental effect on the brain's functioning. And so scalp hair is a insulation for our metabolically intense brain. And so this article is forwarded to me by a very intelligent person, and so I can't take credit for finding it, but I thought it was really interesting. So it's from 1897. It's from a phrenology journal, but it's by Joseph Parrott, and it's called The Purposes of Hairs. And he says, one manifest purpose of the hairs is to protect the head and body against the detrimental effects of sudden chills by retaining a halo of warm air in the folds of this non-conducting tissue. When we consider that the brain is the central telegraph station from whence proceed all sensation and emotions of the human body, and that its proper action depends on being kept at an equable temperature, it will be easy to perceive the importance of hair. And he goes on there. So I think that's the general idea, okay? And so that begs the question of, like, is the loss of scalp hair related to like the hypometabolism of the brain, and thus the hypometabolism of the systemic metabolism? You know, it's not just like one isolated organ that's a problem. It's the whole system. And so the structure in closest proximity to growing hair is the cerebral cortex, our most like evolutionarily advanced part of the brain. And so that's broken up into different regions. The frontal lobes and the parietal area is interesting because that's typically where the balding happens. And so just to appreciate the brain, I wanted to play a small clip of this video, but if you're really grossed out by like human anatomy, you might want to stop watching this video or fast forward. But this is like a Stanford brain clip. Let me turn this all the way down. But I wanted to play it just because I think it's pretty incredible, actually. And there aren't that many videos on YouTube where somebody's just like manhandling a brain. And I think they got this brain from somebody who had just passed. And so it was like a really fresh specimen. But usually when you look up like a autopsy or whatever on the brain, it's, I'm an idiot. I've never done an autopsy before, but they'll preserve it and it will look radically different than how it does here. So just appreciating this brain. Check that video out if you're weird. So this article I think is of specific importance, and I'm following up on it and trying to connect all the dots. But I think that the cerebral cortex, the outermost layer, so the area closest to the proximity of growing hair, is highest and most dependent on glycogen. And this paper, they talk about like, however, during insulin-induced hypoglycemia, where brain glucose availability is limited, glycogen content falls first in areas with the highest metabolic rate, suggesting that glycogen provides fuel to support brain function during pathological hypoglycemia. So stress and aging and inflammation and things like that, those all interfere with a person's ability to use glucose. And so, especially like the polyunsaturated fatty acids and things like that. And so since the greatest determinant of balding in a man or woman is just their age, it kind of makes sense that in the cerebral atrophy also occurs with age, and the ability to constructively use glucose decreases with age, kind of ties together pretty nicely. So if you think this idea is totally crazy, it's really not. And so the scalp hair patterning can be used as a diagnosis for fetal malformations in the brain development. And so this paper says when there's a gross deficit of early brain development in man, such as a primary microcephaly, the scalp hair patterning may show similarities to that found in non-human primates. There's a couple other papers here. Thus, aberrant scalp hair patterning may be utilized as a clinical indicator of aberrant growth and/or shape of early fetal brain prior to the 16 weeks of gestation. Actually, I want to go back to the other paper for a second. They also talk about the 10 to 18 weeks of fetal development, and that's when the brain goes through its most rapid growth phase. And so that's actually also when hair appears. And so they seem to be, again, intrinsically linked. And then the last one is a relationship has been deduced between aberrant scalp hair directional patterning and problems in early brain development and function. And I have like a whole book on just how to diagnose brain problems through the scalp hair patterning. And then what I thought was one of the most interesting things was autism might be related to to developing pattern baldness, so-called. And so this paper was done in 1997, and they said, we found significantly more cases of baldness among autistic patients than among the psychiatric group. And they say, we may conclude that male pattern baldness is a significant cutaneous manifestation of the autistic group. And of course, many different things are happening in autism. I'm not an expert on it, but high serotonin, androstenedione, a hormone, tends to be elevated. It has a connection to male pattern baldness, and just a profound deprivation. And so I think that also ties together nicely with the idea that baldness is results from the accumulation of stress. And so the last thing I'll talk about, because this video could be really long, the thing that kind of moved me over the edge, because I wasn't not convinced by this idea, because Ray Peat is really the person that introduced me to this. I wasn't not convinced that he was right about it. I'm sure he was right about it when he told me. But I didn't have any extra information to go on. And then at a certain point, I think I typed in like hypertension, cerebral atrophy, and I got like so many hits on it. And hypertension is uncontroversially associated with male pattern baldness. And so then I started typing in other things like insulin resistance, Cushing's disease, menopause, polycystic ovarian syndrome, puberty, atherosclerosis, prostate cancer, just generalized aging. And those all are conditions of cerebral atrophy or problems with the different areas of the cerebral cortex, and that can also manifest as male pattern or androgenic alopecia or whatever you want to call it, pattern baldness. And so that was very interesting to me. And again, this hasn't been sussed out in the research to my knowledge. And so again, I'm putting forth kind of a hypothesis that needs to be tested in some capacity. And just the effects of stress on the prefrontal cortex and the parietal cortex and things like that is just not controversial. So, and that is demonstrated really well in Cushing's disease, so hypercorticolism. And cortisol is something that has come back in males and females as being something that not only has a devastating effect on hair growth, but is related to so-called androgenic alopecia. In this paper in 2000, they say hypercorticolismic state manifested in patients with Cushing's disease promotes the premature development of cerebral atrophy. And again, if the brain can't get sugar or there's insulin resistance, it's going to have a devastating effect on the brain's metabolism and the storage of glycogen. And that I don't have the paper in front of me, but there was a paper that talked about how the brain, like Albert St. George has a great quote where he talks about how nature builds on its structures on top of old structures. And the cerebral cortex is the newest structure on top of the older, more like primitive structures. And it was the newest structures that were most devastated by things like stress and inflammation and aging and things like that. So again, that would just tie in perfectly with the idea of insulin resistance being more likely as a person gets older, relying on free fatty acids instead of sugar, being less able to store glycogen efficiently, and just all the generalized things that happen with aging and stress as they accumulate. So all that to get to this hierarchical approach of pattern baldness, This is just me spitballing, I don't think this is not a religious text. It can be changed and made better. I'm just throwing things out there. But just from my experience of talking to people, things I've experienced myself, I threw this together. And so the less involved and then very involved, to me meant how easy they are to introduce, and not how they are involved in pattern baldness or whatever. So less involved, meaning that you could just incorporate them more easily than the very involved things. And so things like vitamin D, vitamin K2, aspirin, raised daily carrot salad, ruminant liver, eggs, salt, sweet orange juice, canned oysters, low-fat milk, ruminant meat, refined coconut oil, real butter, Parmigiano Reggiano, gelatin, strong coffee, white button mushrooms, incandescent, red light. I'm sure this list could be longer. These are just safe things that I think can have an anti-inflammatory, anti-stress effect. And then the more involved things would be like supplementing thyroid. Like you should kind of know what you're doing a little bit. You should probably check out Rhoda Barnes' book, Hope for Hypothyroidism, the Unsuspected Illness, and read through it before you supplement with thyroid, just so it's not like totally a mystery. Like safe antibiotics like minocycline, penicillin, VK, and erythromycin, progesterone and DHEA, and possibly blood donation. Like I could all see those having some place in a more advanced approach to trying to correct hair loss. And then the very involved things, like the more complex things, are just like the general quality of a person's environment. So work, relationships, the climate, if it's a really cold place, air, water, and also the electromagnetic fields, I think could be a problem as well. And so those things those can be more difficult to address. Like you can't just quit your job, or it might take a while to identify like a very toxic relationship in your family or loved ones or what have you. And so, for what it's worth, this is the hierarchical pyramid I put together, and hopefully that's useful for some people. So that was really all I had. That was like a whirlwind. I hope it wasn't too confusing. I'm just kind of throwing my thoughts out there. Again, these ideas are in hypothesis stage, but I wouldn't put this video together if I didn't think there was some merit to it. And I'm going to keep trying to unravel the mystery. So if anybody has any thoughts, I'd be happy to try to answer the comments below. And again, thank you guys so much for watching. I sincerely appreciate it. Please subscribe. I'll try to do new videos regularly whenever inspiration strikes. Thank you for liking the video. That really helps. And then commenting as well, and then subscribing. So guys, thank you so much. I'll talk to you soon. Take care.